Okay, so I think I am going to give you your test on Tuesday. So rather than going through a whole other flipped lesson, I'm actually going to make it an audio recording. So here I'm picking up with the Gettysburg Address. And as you can see, it was actually given on November 19th, 1863, right up here. And on June 1st, 1865, it was actually Senator Charles Sumner commented, this was after Abraham Lincoln's death, on what is now considered the most famous speech by President Lincoln. He said that this was a monumental act and that Lincoln was mistaken, that the world will little note nor long remember what we say here. Rather, the Bostonian remarked, the world noted at once what he said and will never cease to remember it. The battle itself was less important than the speech. And I think that's very important here to mention that. So here's a copy of the whole Gettysburg Address that you can actually read on your own. But as you can see, it was not very long. And there was a time where I might have you memorize that. But since we don't have time for that, you got lucky. Okay, so pretty much after this point, after he gives over all military control, President Lincoln after the Gettysburg Address, he turns over all military control over to Grant. And we see a really big difference here between Grant and, of course, we have General Lee versus the two of them. And pretty much, although he had trouble breaking through Lee's troops, Grant hammered on to Richmond. His biggest thing was no retreat. This had been the problem that McClellan had faced and Burnside had faced. And Grant said, no, we are going onward to Richmond. And then, of course, you have Grant, who here you can tell he looks a little bit sloppy. And then we have Lee, who was, of course, this perfect-looking, well-dressed man. And they had a lot of differences between the two of them. And even though Grant had lost a lot of men, he still had plenty to count on as well as supplies. But the South, couldn't say the same because, remember, we know that their advantages and disadvantages were really big. In June 1864, add this one to your timeline as well, Grant will begin his siege at Petersburg. It was a very important railroad station that pretty much at this point, if he could actually siege Petersburg, and you can see it on the map right here, then there was no way the Confederacy could win. Because at this point, they were desperate for food. And if they don't get it, they're finished. The Battle of Five Forks would be the last chance for the Confederates to actually break through the line. But it was Union General Phil Sheridan who would stop the Confederate general. Remember, General Pickett from Gettysburg would now actually make his way down here into the South. And he ends up being stopped. It was the most lopsided Union victory of the war. And at the same time that we have the siege of Petersburg and this Battle of Five Forks, and you can see how the Union is slowly making their way down. And where are they making their way to? But Richmond. And remember, that was their last goal. They had already seized the Mississippi River. They had already kept the blockade. They had broken through the South's blockade, and now the last part of their plan had been to seize Richmond. And at the same time, Sherman is marching towards Atlanta. He's going to capture Atlanta, and when he does that, Sherman secures the presidency for Abraham Lincoln. So here you can see Sherman's march right here. In September of 1864, he captures Atlanta and secures that presidency for Lincoln. In February, by 1865, he'll end up moving north to the Carolinas. But when he burned Atlanta, it left a path of destruction that was 60 miles wide. That's almost from here to maybe like the Farley Plaza on the way to the shore. And the South would have a very difficult time of recovering. And you can see right here, you can actually click on this link if you go onto our PDF, and you'll be able to see right here Sherman's march. And this is a video. So you can actually click on that yourself. If you click on the PDF, I'm not going to take the time to go through it now. You can see this picture of Grant, and this is as Grant is making his way into Appomattox. Finally, peace is going to come. On April 2nd, 1865. Oh, you know what? Even before that, I actually think I forgot this part. I don't have it on your video. But on March 4th, 1865, Grant is still sitting outside of Petersburg, not going anywhere. But it was March 4th, 1865, that Lincoln will give his second inaugural address. And it was truly the best speech ever delivered. We'll actually take a look at that when we start the next chapter, but just keep that in mind on March 4th. But on April 2nd, 1865, Grant would break through the Confederate lines. And on April 9th, 1865, Lee would go into Wilmer McLean's house. Remember that story with Wilmer McLean? Remember, he had actually lived in Manassas. And remember, the war actually started in his backyard when a cannonball literally, found its way into his house. He decided he had wanted to get away from the war. He ends up moving to Appomattox Courthouse, which was not a courthouse, it was a city in Virginia. And they happen to knock on his door, and he goes into Wilmer McLean's house. They ask if they can actually draw up the papers. And here he is. The war actually started in his yard, and it actually ends in his living room on April 9th, 1865. They sign the papers. You can see Grant walking in here, and he was just absolutely devastated. And he basically took this entire responsibility of the war. He felt that was all on him. And as he walks out of the house, the men cheered. But Grant actually says, "The war is over. The rebels are our countrymen again." And that spoke a lot. Those men were cheering. I mean, here they are. They had brought the Confederates to their knees. And Grant saying, "No, they are our countrymen again." And that was a really big thing for him to say. I want you to click on that link, and that'll actually take you to the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. Take a look at this video. All right, make sure you watch that tonight. Okay, so make sure you click on there. And then take a look at the war's terrible toll. It was the bloodiest conflict ever. 260,000 Confederates died. 360,000 Union were lost. And we can see what the cause and effect was of the Civil War. It was the issue of slavery that's going to end up dividing the North and the South. The abolitionists had wanted slavery to end. The Southern states seceded after Lincoln's election. And then, of course, the Civil War happens, and the effects were that Lincoln's going to issue that Emancipation Proclamation. War is going to destroy the South's economy, and hundreds and thousands of Americans are going to be killed. You can see that this is Wilmer McLean's living room. Actually, Lincoln's son, Robert, was there, and everybody was there to witness the end of the war. But the war will not end peacefully. It's not like everybody can just kind of put their weapons down and say, "Hey, we're buddies again." It's going to take more than that. Take a look here and click here on this button so you can take an idea at the legacy of the war. And basically the result of the war is going to be that, yes, the nation was actually united, but it wasn't perfect. An end to slavery is going to happen with the 13th Amendment, although we're not going to feel its effects for really another 100 years before African Americans would actually feel free. Remember, this is 1865, and we're going to have the Civil Rights Movement of 1965, and we're still going to see a lot of segregation in the South. And even though the war may have ended on April 9th, 1865, technically the effects of the war are not over. So make sure you click on all of these links, okay, so you get a better idea of how the war ended. Good luck, and I will see you guys tomorrow.